Good morning, everyone. We'll be getting started in just a moment with our Government Affairs Committee meeting for April. We'll let everyone get in here and then we'll get the program underway. Again, if you're just joining us, we're going to let a few more people get into the meeting and then we will get started. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Garrett Sheehan. I'm President and CEO of the Greater New Haven Chamber of Commerce and Quinnipiac Chamber of Commerce. And if you're new to the Government Affairs Committee, welcome. We know many people have come here today to hear Governor Lamont. He's going to be joining us at approximately 9 a.m. So for the first half hour, we're going to work through the business side of our Government Affairs Committee. We'll get an update on affairs going on at the legislature and give you an opportunity to share some thoughts with us as well. As we get started, I do want to thank all of our sponsors that we have here at the Chamber. Thank you again to Connecticut Natural Gas, Southern Connecticut Gas, and UI, part of the Avangrid family, for all of their support, and all of our investors that have been with us throughout the last year for many years, but definitely their support throughout the pandemic has been critical to how we've been able to do our operations here at the Chamber of Commerce. As I mentioned, this is our normal Government Affairs Committee meeting, and this is a joint committee that we hold between both the Quinnipiac Chamber of Commerce and the Greater New Haven Chamber of Commerce. Karen Del Vecchio is our chair of the Quinnipiac Chamber Government Affairs Committee, and she could not be here this morning, but she extends her welcome. I also want to thank Frank DiCristina, who's the chair of the Quinnipiac Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors, and I know we have Jeff Klaus out there as well, who is the chair of the Greater New Haven Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Jim Perito. Jim is with Halloran Sage. He's a partner there, and he's also our Government Affairs Committee chair. Jim?
Great. Thank you, Garrett. Welcome, everybody. Good morning. Normally, we go through and introduce ourselves, but with all the participants this morning, we're not going to do that. So I welcome you all. I hope we have an interesting conversation with the governor in a few moments. And let's start off with our state legislative update. Mike Martone from Focus Government Affairs. He's been giving us our reports over the past few months, and hopefully we have some news. So Mike, over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Garrett and Jim. And hello and good morning, everyone. We are in a bit of what I would call a lull period. Others call it halftime of the legislative session, with the exception of Appropriations and Finance and Judiciary. All the other committees have completed their business. Bills are going through the process of getting a file copy, which includes a fiscal note. The House is not scheduled to meet until April 19th. The Senate has not announced their schedule as of yet. So when the House meets on April 19th, there's going to be a little over 7 weeks of session remaining until we convene, until we adjourn on the 9th of June. We're hearing that House leadership has told their committee chairs that their bills have to be ready to go early, and the committees are going to be limited to their top 5 issues. If bills are not ready to go early, don't expect them to go at all. The issue, one of the big issues that I see out there is there's a number of really, really big, important issues that are awaiting action. And I'll just run through a few of them. Recreational marijuana is one. Clearly the votes are there to pass. The debate is on expungement of criminal records and how communities disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs will benefit. If those issues are able to be worked out, we will have recreational marijuana in Connecticut as we do in our neighboring states. Sports betting looks good to go. The governor has reached a deal with the 2 Indian tribes, 2 casinos, and that apparently will, I think that's going to go this year. One of the major controversial issues, as we all know, is affordable housing. There was 24 hours of debate on a number of bills in the public, in a committee this year on affordable housing. That will be a very, very controversial bill that's going to take up an awful lot of time. Another 24-hour debate was on the religious exemption for vaccines. Right now, parents are able to declare that they are religiously opposed to getting a vaccine and able to send their kids to public schools without vaccines. That's probably going to need some work on the floor. It's the first time it's ever gotten out of the Public Health Committee, and I think the chances of that passing, I think, are very questionable. Another major issue is the aid in dying or assisted suicide, depending on which side of the issue you're on. That got out of Public Health Committee this year. Not real clear whether that's going to move any further. We also have Senator Looney's mansion tax, which would assess a 1% statewide property tax on houses valued at $430,000 or over. He projects it would raise $73 million to pay for pilot and other municipal aid programs that many consider to be underfunded. I think we would all agree, especially given the run up in prices through COVID, that a house valued at $430,000 in most parts of the state is not a mansion. We then have the Transportation Climate Initiative, which proposes to make Connecticut a cleaner, greener state by imposing anywhere, depending on who you talk to, a 6 to 18 cent tax on a gallon of gas. We have the truck mileage tax, which would add anywhere up to 17.5 cents per miles traveled by trucks in Connecticut. And on top of that, you have a very controversial bottle bill. You have the proposal to ban flavored tobacco products. These are all very controversial issues that are going to consume a significant amount of floor time. Again, in the little over 7 weeks that we have. Republicans are already upset about the lack of access to the building, and I think they're going to have a field day as any of these bills are called. They'll be what we call talkers. They're going to consume an awful lot of floor time. Moving on to another equally controversial bill is the public option, which would allow small employers and nonprofits to utilize the state health care system. It was very controversial in committee. The House chair, who was a moderate Democrat, introduced an amendment that ended up passing that would require that the public option come under audit scrutiny and also be subject to the same regulations that private insurers are held to. The proponents of that bill are trying to strip that piece out and get the bill back to where it was before. The chamber had testified in opposition to the bill. We also have the Covered Connecticut program, which proposes to expand access to affordable health care. It would impose a $50 million assessment on insurers that would fund subsidies, but I think would undoubtedly raise rates in the private sector. It would also limit the annual increase on prescription drugs to inflation plus 2%. House Bill 5607 would require that an as of yet undecided amount of CARES Act money be used to keep the unemployment trust fund solvent. The state currently has about a $700 million loan from the feds to keep the fund solvent. Without this, the business community is going to be on the hook for that money. The Commerce Committee reported out Senate Bill 711, which would prohibit unemployment rates for small business being raised if the unemployment is largely due to COVID. It would also exempt PPE from the sales tax and require that state agencies prepare a federal regulatory analysis when they're developing regulations which would impact business. We'll move on to the Labor Committee. There are 13 bills which the business community is watching very carefully. I won't go through all of them in the interest of time, but I will provide some highlights. One bill would require all businesses to provide paid sick leave of up to 40 hours a year to all employees. That right now that is limited to employers of 50 employees or greater. Another would penalize employees if they adjust employee shifts without sufficient notification. This is the predictive scheduling bill that's been around the building for several years. I think this would have a very detrimental impact on restaurants, who, as we all know, have been hit very hard during COVID. But it would require businesses to pay people in the event that their schedules were were changed without sufficient notice. So if you have a snowstorm on a weekend and the restaurant owner tells folks not to come in on a Saturday morning, he's likely to have to pay at least a portion of their pay. Senate Bill 6830, House Bill, I should say, 6830 would require equal pay for comparable work versus equal work. And finally, House Bill 6478 creates a presumption that an employee who contracts COVID would be presumed to have contracted it in the workplace, which again would place a burden on employers. And in a recent session, the House and Senate gave themselves the ability within federal guidelines to appropriate more than $4 billion of the COVID relief money coming into Connecticut. There were several in the legislature that felt that the governor had too much control over how the spending of that money would take place. So I don't think anyone really knows what's going to happen in the next 7 weeks. I mean, unprecedented is a word that we hear way too often these days, but we really are in unprecedented times in the legislature. The House and Senate are not planning on meeting on the same day to reduce the number of people at the Capitol at any given day. And, as we said, there's dozens of controversial bills out there known as talkers. They're going to consume a great deal of floor time. And then that's not even to mention the budget, which we will see later this month. So my sense is that committee chairs that have their acts together and they've garnered support among their colleagues for bills will find that their issues are going to move forward. And those that don't will probably see their issues left till next year or beyond. So that's the legislative update in a nutshell.
Great. Mike, I had a couple of questions. I don't know if you have the answers to, but on the recreational marijuana and the sports betting, is there any estimate of what kind of revenue, if those passed, that they'd be bringing in?
I don't have that off the top of my head.
Okay.
I can get that for you, Jim.
I was just wondering, what kind of numbers they talk about on that, and also on Senator Looney's mansion tax. What's the likability of that passing?
He set that up fairly. The way the money is being spread, there are three different. There's three different sectors of towns that would get the money. There's the urban areas, and then there's the probably suburban, but would not considered wealthy areas, and then the wealthy areas of Connecticut. And the urban areas are supposed to get more. No one is going to get hurt. No town would lose revenue because of this pilot, the change in the pilot funding. So I think I think that's got a reasonable shot of passing, because I think he set it up very well, so he is going to get enough support moving forward. Just to get back to sports betting for just 2 seconds, though. I don't know the exact number, but I think that number is kind of up in the air, because I recall Rhode Island has sports betting, and a couple of years ago the Patriots won the Super Bowl, and it turns out everybody in Rhode Island had bet on the Patriots, so the payout wasn't quite as good as what they had hoped for. So,
yeah.
And I think there's also a question of people that, we all know people that gamble now with the neighborhood bookie. Where are they going to go?
That's probably right. I think on Senator Looney's the mansion tax, I think probably there'll be a lot of debate on what's the number, what's the cutoff number, since the 430,000 is not at all an
really
extravagant house
no,
cost,
I
especially
would
in some of the Fairfield County towns. That's one would say that's a fairly modest home at that rate.
With the run up in prices we've seen everywhere in Connecticut since COVID, that's really, it's very modest homes is worth that now, I think.
Okay, Garrett, now over to you.
Great, thanks, Mike, and thanks, Jim, and thank you everyone for joining us. So we've got 90 people on the webinar this morning, and we know you want to hear from the governor, but also a good opportunity for us to just speak about what the chamber is advocating for. And as we went into this year with our legislative agenda, it was bring back business, bring back jobs. And before I get to all of the negative things that Mike just went through, I do want to acknowledge one big piece of that was limiting restrictions on business where it was safe to do so, getting people vaccinated so we can get back to economic activity. And so on that front, I think we've seen a lot of progress. There's more progress to be made, but Connecticut, and credit the state and the governor, we are doing a great job on vaccinations, and that's going to get us back to business activity a lot more quickly, and that's really where we all want to be. But there's a real danger here, as you just heard Mike walk through all of these things. Actually through all of the horrible tragedy of the pandemic, I think in Connecticut we've seen some bright spots for our economy that we could actually tie onto and carry forward. But our basic cost structure, what we talk about here all the time, cost of doing business in Connecticut, has not changed. And in fact, many of the things Mike just brought up would actually raise costs or go after specific industries, make it more difficult for jobs to grow here in Connecticut. And so that's what we're really concerned about as we talk with legislators, as we talk with the governor later on. We have this chance now in Connecticut to add more jobs, to really get a boost to our economy. And unfortunately, many of the things that we're talking about here are just going to be a negative. Yesterday I was part of a press conference with CBIA talking about our unemployment trust fund. I know many of you actually had brought the unemployment trust fund up to me as an issue even before the pandemic struck, because we were underfunded. And of course, as soon as it did strike, we were in a debt situation for being able to pay unemployment costs. So we right now are nearly $700 million owed to the federal government to be able to pay for the unemployment claims that have gone out. That's one of the highest among all states that is actually taking a loan out from the federal government. And it's going to take a long time to pay that down. So one of the things that we asked of the governor yesterday is that some of the federal stimulus money be put into the unemployment trust fund to help pay down that debt, so that all of us, all the employers out there, do not get hit with a surcharge, a special assessment for the many years going forward to be able to pay that money down. That would be a real hindrance on our ability to bring back jobs right at a point when we feel like the economy is going to be taking off. So we'll ask the governor about that. You heard Mike talk about the public option. We all agree healthcare costs are too high. We'd like to find ways that we can bring those down responsibly. But this bill does not seem to do that, getting the state involved in the health insurance market, unless there's significant serious curbs and requirements. But even so, if there are, there's a high likelihood that the general fund will be the backstop on any overruns in costs, which then again gets passed on to the rest of the business community and all of Connecticut. We're also concerned, Mike brought it up, House Bill 6447, that's a drug pricing scheme. It's going to increase insurance costs, but the other piece of it is, it really changes the pricing mechanism for our biotech industry. And we're all against the gas pricing, where real gouging on a specific drug. That's not the issue. Everyone can agree that those are significant challenges. But when we have a growing biotech community here, to have Connecticut be one of the first states, if not the first state, to now put in special price controls without a real deep conversation with our biotech community, seems like it's going against our economic development efforts. And then the last thing I'll say is just those labor bills that Mike talked about. We signed on to some letters urging our legislators to be very careful in this area. I mean, you can really see your expenses going up. A presumption that someone got COVID at the workplace. As we all know, COVID is everywhere. It can be anywhere, and it's very difficult to track where someone received it. And I know from talking with all of you, all of our employers, in our workplaces, we're doing as many things as we possibly can to keep people safe. So some of these things here really would seem to try to set back the progress that I think we're making in Connecticut. And I just want to let all of you, especially since we have so many people online, know that we are advocating. We have Mike up at the state capitol. I've testified, written letters on several of these bills, and will continue to do that. And really what's most impactful, though, are the stories from you. So I urge you to contact your legislators as these bills come up for votes. We'll give you some opportunities. We have a digital tool that we can use, so you can directly contact the legislator based on where you live. Last thing, and I'll end on a positive note, we do want to see more investment in economic development, workforce development. Also, possibly it looks like there'll be some more in infrastructure. We really want the Greater New Haven region to grow. And so we hope that some of the other things that are up there that they're considering at the legislature, especially as they look at the federal stimulus funds, that those funds will be invested prudently in a way that will help our economy flourish. So Jim, I'll turn it back to you and we can open it up for some questions.
Great. Just to remind everybody, thank you, Garrett, that we can see in both the chat or the questions directly to us. If you have questions you want to send us now in anticipation of when the governor joins us. And someone actually did ask, and Mike just sort of left, I don't know if you can hear me now, but they asked about the Senator Looney's bill. Was that value based on the assessed value or the fair market value? And the questioner thought it was the assessed value.
Correct. It is the assessed value.
Which is 70% of the fair market
Right.
value. Right. Okay. So yeah, if you want to send your questions in, we're going to cover the points that both Garrett and Mike went over in terms of the sort of the targeted bills that we're concerned about. But if you have other questions, please send them to us. We've had a couple send in prior to today's meeting that we're going to ask the governor about, and we'll just open it up to the floor if anybody has questions now. Write them in.
And also, if there's an issue that we're not talking about here today that you're aware of is before the legislature, please let us know. I shouldn't let an opportunity go by without talking about Tweed as well, Jim. And I jokingly say we got approval from the Supreme Court for Tweed to be able to expand its runway, eliminate the state law at the exact same time when the pandemic struck and the airline industry collapsed. So it's kind of the story of Tweed, but we are still very supportive of Tweed being the southern tier airport. And so that's another topic that we can bring up with the governor as well.
Okay, great. So it's 8:52. He's scheduled in a few minutes to jump on.
And feel free to throw anything, as Jim said, into the chat, question and answer box. And and as Jim pointed out, anything you want us to ask, now is a great time to put it in, and we can even discuss that issue a little bit further.
Okay, here's one right now. What are the rumors about how the federal money will be spent? Really good question. We're going to ask the governor that. One of the things we sort of want to know is not just the current tranche of money that we're expecting in, but the infrastructure bill that the Biden administration has proposed, which is going to take some time to work its way through Congress in one way or another. If that gets passed, are we ready for the types of projects? If you remember back with the Obama administration, I think it was the Tiger grants, to have shovel-ready projects so that if and when that money comes this way, can we get some of the serious infrastructure projects that we've been putting off for way too long started and moving. And it's also that's job creation in the best sense. We have the folks out there building all those highways and bridges that we need. So,
and just to add to that, Jim, the legislature just recently gave themselves the ability within federal guidelines to have a say in how the federal COVID money will be spent. It's I've read anywhere between $4 billion and $6 billion will be coming to Connecticut, and that doesn't count the unemployment that people have been receiving and the $1,400 checks that many have received in Connecticut since COVID hit.
And what's their mechanism to determine that? Will they wait until they're in session or not?
Yes, or I think they would go into special session for that.
I see the governor is logging on right now.
Morning, Governor. Well, as soon as we see the governor's camera come up, we'll join him in the conversation. Jim, the last thing I'll just add to that too is that I know the state is still waiting on some guidance from the different federal administrations as they work out the rules, with it all generally being pretty flexible on what you can spend the money on. But as these different tranches of money come through different federal agencies, there'll be different rules and attachments to them.
Great.
And other questions? Oh, I think we got one from Nan. All right. Are we shovel ready on any mass transit projects? That's a good one that we can ask to the governor. And let's see. How do we, on the long term, retain the surge of new residents moving into Connecticut? Another great question. And that kind of goes to what I was saying before. You know, we have had a bounce through all this devastation. We have seen some real positives on our economy, and we want to be able to sustain that and grow that. It seems like an opportunity for Connecticut, an opportunity we haven't had in quite a long time.
Another one came in here.
Great. And we will have the governor on in about 4 minutes. So they are ready to go as soon as we hit 9 o'clock. Other questions there? Let's see. Hey, Mike, this is a good question. Why don't you just talk about how the legislature is working this year? I know very different in that everything's on Zoom. People are not in person. How has that worked out so far? And do you see that changing at all for the rest of the session?
Yeah, it's been interesting. It wasn't real clear when we started how Zoom public hearings were going to go. And I think what we've seen is we've attracted more people to participate, because you're able to sit home in your in your lounge chair, and when your time comes up at 11 o'clock at night, you're able to speak versus being at the Capitol. What's happened though, this has resulted in at least 3 hearings going overnight, and people and committee chairs holding off, cutting dialogue off at 24 hours. That hasn't happened in the past. Going forward, it's going to be it's very difficult for us lobbyists to engage with legislators, because we don't have the ability to be at the LOB and grab people as we see them coming down the escalator. You have to. It's all calls and emails, and I think we would all agree that it's just a much more difficult way to do business. I think you're going to see the Republicans who feel that they should be given more. There should be more access to live activity at the Capitol. Will talk bills to death and will really hold up the process. And again, as I mentioned, there are a whole lot of very, very controversial bills. And you have a very progressive legislature who wants to act, who wants to get stuff done. So.
And Mike, have you seen any groups that, one of the complaints I heard, this is actually from Senator Kelly, was, there is a real impact when you get 200 people to show up at the legislature about an issue. Frequently those are about progressive issues, but that does impact the way legislators are thinking about things. Has anyone figured out a way to break through that? I know for Business Day with CBIA, we did that in a virtual setting. The governor attended that, but anything you're seeing in the way people are able to reach legislators and kind of change public opinion?
It's very difficult. I think there's a lot more email campaigns going on. I mean, I think people have discovered that calling legislative offices really doesn't get you anywhere. So if you don't have legislators' cell phones, it's all about email campaigns this year.
For our businesses that are out there, Mike, just any tips? Obviously work through the chamber, but any other tips that people can, well, actually I see the governor's here. So Jim, I'll toss it back to you.
Keep going. Tell me those tips, Mike.
Governor. Working on golf.
Good morning, Governor. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Hey, Jim. Good morning.
Good to see you.
Hey,
we thought maybe we'd give you 5-10 minutes to sort of talk to our group. We have probably 80 participants on with us. Maybe let us know how things are going in the fight against COVID, and then we can start talking about some of the issues that the business community is concerned about. So I'll leave it for you first.
All right. Well, thank you. I'll be brief and love the questions, but I'll start with what you asked. I think right now where we are in COVID is almost the mirror image of where we were a year ago. A year ago, we were desperately concerned about older folks. That's where all the complications were. They were the ones that were much more likely to be in a hospital, or hospitals were being overwhelmed. And I was doing everything I could to protect that population in nursing homes and senior centers, and making sure they social distance and tried to stay close to home. I would tell you, Jim, a year later, better than 2/3, I think, of our folks over the age of 45 have been vaccinated. The overwhelming majority of the folks 65 and above have. What that means is that the hospitalization rates are down or flat anyway. I guess they're plateauing right now. Fatalities are way down. And I'm really glad that, for folks my age, we're vaccinated and we're out and about again, doing it cautiously. I'm not Texas, I'm not Florida. I still think it makes a lot more sense to wear the mask. But that's allowing our restaurants to be open at 100% and allows our economy to get back. When I say it's the mirror image of where we were before, it's in the sense that now I'm more worried about our young. And that's going to take care of itself. I'd like to think over the course of the next 2 or 3 weeks, provided they get vaccinated. I do worry a little bit, being young myself, that sometimes you can take these things for granted and you say, hey, everything's back to normal and I don't have to worry about it. And we are finding that where there is the, what they call the New York variant, B.1.1.7 is coming up from New York, that's probably close to a majority of our infections now. And I would tell you that it's highly infectious. The vaccines work. That's what's really great. So I'd like to think that over the next few weeks, if our young people get vaccinated at the same rate that, the rest of us did, we're going to have a pretty good summer here in Connecticut. And I think our economy is going to come bouncing back, Jim. I really do. I think there's a lot of pent-up demand there. I don't know about you. I was really happy to get back to a restaurant and see some friends, and I think you're going to see that reflected in sales across the board. I can tell you, Connecticut during the last quarter had one of the strongest economies in GDP growth in the country, and we haven't said that very often over the last 25 years. I think that's in part because we kept more of our businesses open safely. I think it's because our budget is balanced. We're going to have a surplus this year. We got a ratings upgrade from Moody's last week. That hasn't happened in 20 years. So I'd like to think that we're building a foundation for really good prosperity going forward. Listening from the back of the room, Garrett talking about, people moving back to the state. The moving vans are turning around. First time in 10 plus years that we've added about 50,000 people. And no, they're not all in Greenwich and Stamford. They're all over the state. A lot of really great development going on in New Haven, the greater New Haven area. And a lot of housing going up. I think it's a couple thousand units, really bringing our cities to life. And, right now I'm in the middle of the legislative session. Mike missed not having everybody in the building. It is kind of quiet. It's also kind of peaceful, I might add. But we're getting back to business. We're going to have a strong budget. We're not going to have to raise taxes. We're going to make some really needed investments in not-for-profits and social services. Thanks to the Biden administration, to be blunt, this is federal money. Makes an enormous difference. I want your help. We got a lot of money for workforce, and we're going to be creating certificate programs at, say, our community colleges. Help us create those 16-week programs that train people for a skill set where you want to hire people for. That's one of our priorities going forward, and we need the business community there. And finally, I'll just say that, let's face it, New Haven is the transportation hub of the state, and in many ways, the whole Northeast region. And I continue to want to make those investments to speed up rail service, make sure the Tweed Airport is all that it can be, and create, clean up some of the log jams we have in our, road system. And we got right now is a unique opportunity. If this, the infrastructure bill got a little big, I got to admit, it's a lot more than roads and bridges and rail, but I'm going to focus on the roads, bridges, and rails. And as long as Connecticut can pay its 10% or 20%, we're going to be at the front of the line with Rosa DeLauro, Chairman of Appropriations. And I'll leave you with a note that won't make all you as happy, but I do need help in terms of highway user fee, which is just on the biggest tractor trailer trucks. Don't let anybody tell you it's fuel oil delivery or something like that. That's a lot of bunk. These are the guys that are driving through our state. They pay it in New York, they pay it elsewhere. And that would allow us to make sure that we have our share. So when the federal funding comes, we can make an enormous difference. And we're going to give you a teaser on what you can do with that funding by providing at least free bus service all throughout the greater New Haven area on weekends, starting Memorial Day, which I think means a lot of kids can get to a beach or a museum, and it means a lot of, single parents, makes it a little easier for them to buy their groceries. How's that for starters?
You're giving a lot of follow-up questions that I can pick up on. Thank you. I do agree with you. I think that things are going to really take off in terms of just people moving around and being out and about. I, like you, have gotten vaccinated, so I'm chomping at the bit to be out there. And if the traffic on the local highways is any indication, people are coming out a lot more now. But let me just follow up on the infrastructure issue. Last time, I think it was during the Obama administration, there was the Tiger grants, and there was the shovel-ready projects. Are we in a position so that with this first bill that's come through, and then with the Biden administration's infrastructure bill that's in the process now, will we be ready with projects so that we can really, roll it out, get the construction folks out on the road and move forward?
Yeah, Jim, I hope so. I think so. We're going to be at the front of the line. We put in a lot of money last year for design work, so we know exactly where those choke points are on the highways, what we want to do with a Union Station, what we want to do in terms of Shoreline East and Metro North. And fortunately, Amtrak Joe is sort of a rail guy, so we're going to have a lot of support there in terms of really accelerating Excella from Boston all the way down to New York and Washington. So I'm going to make sure we're at the front of that line and make sure we're designed, ready to go. And I want to get down and see Mayor Pete as soon as I can.
Great. Let's talk about the unemployment costs and the unemployment fund. Is there any thought that we're going to use some of the money that comes in the most recent funding to sort of pay our substantial debt that we have in that fund right now?
Yeah, let me think out loud with you on this, because I'd love your feedback. Look, I come out of small business. I know that an unfunded unemployment fund like we have now, we were building it up 2 years ago. We were making up for lost time, but nothing prepared us for what happened last year. And now I think we're like 700 million underwater.
Right.
I'm talking to Rosa and John and our congressional delegation saying, if you want to make an enormous difference for small business that I think would be very bipartisan, something you don't hear in Washington very often, turn those loans into grants. Or just the first 200. That's across the board. All 50 states have picked up that loan. And I think that would be a real talk about stability for small business and heading off a potential tax increase. Right. That said, if we don't get that, right now we're getting zero interest on it. So it is, it's not free money. I got to pay it back, but it's not costing us anything along the way. So then the determination is, what do I do with the money we just got? And we do have a surplus for this year. I can provide free or affordable childcare to more people, or more small business grant programs, or pour $100 million into the unemployment fund, which will mean potential increases in surcharges are mitigated. We're going to have a little more clarity on what we can expect from the feds, I think, in the next few weeks, but it's definitely on the table, Jim.
Good. That's because for small businesses and a lot of businesses, that's really a concern that, that's something we have to pay down the line. And unfortunately, Connecticut has had a history of sort of not paying its obligations and putting it off to another day, which we all have been dealing with now for a number of years. Another question that's come up is the public option, and there's somewhat some confusion on it, but a lot of people feel that the state should not be getting into the insurance business. What is your thoughts on that, and what do you think is going to come on your desk from the legislature?
I'm not positive what's going to come to my desk from the legislature, but I can tell you a couple of things. Like you, we all know that healthcare costs have accelerated, and that's like a fixed cost that we got to pay, and that's really tough on small businesses, tough on working families. I do tell the legislature that we've made, thanks to funds we get from the feds, the exchange is much more affordable, much less the premium cost. For families earning in small business $70,000 a year. So we are doing that. We've got some other things that'll help bring down the cost of healthcare. Everybody always wants to fight about who pays, the insurance payer, the single payer pay, and that's not my focus at all. My focus is how do you bring down the costs of healthcare over a period of time to make it more affordable and accessible to people. So I'll take a look at what comes out of the legislature, but I'll tell you one thing, Jim, that I don't want. I don't want the taxpayers of the state of Connecticut to have to underwrite all the risk. We've done that in the past, and we end up with enormous unfunded liabilities, and that's not going to happen when it comes to this option.
Okay, good, thank you. Let's see here. Report.
Jim, I'll just jump in and,
sure.
and Governor, related to healthcare, talking to some of our biotech companies, concerned about the drug pricing cap. And I listened to your press conference you did, I think yesterday with Governor Baker. And obviously there are some really bad situations out there that we all want to avoid. But with this proposal, what are the kind of guarantees that those price impacts you have will reach the consumer and that it won't have a negative impact on this industry that we're really trying to grow here in New Haven?
Look, I thought about it long and hard. Pharma costs, everybody wants predictability, and pharma costs are particularly unpredictable. And when you're generic, you've been out there in the market for 20 years, you paid back all your investment risk. The idea that EpiPen could, increase by 4 or 5 times and what that does to a family is unconscionable. Look, that said, biopharma is a big part of the greater New Haven area and big part of Connecticut's future. So I've talked to Boehringer, I've talked to Pfizer, I've talked to everybody, and Charlie, he comes out of that world, Harvard Pilgrim, so he's talked to everybody else. And we wanted to put in place a plan that said, look, when that drug comes to market, gets the FDA approval, they set the price. They set a price so that they get a good return on the investment and risk and everything they need to make sure they're incented to develop, the next drug. But then we just wanted to limit the rate of increase for the foreseeable future. We did inflation plus 2%. And if there are any extenuating circumstances, we can adjust that. I think it's a good, fair way to incent our pharma industry to continue to make those incentives and give the taxpayers of the state of Connecticut, I pay a lot of these bills for state employees, and it comes out of Medicaid and the such. So it allows us to make our costs a lot more predictable and your costs a lot more predictable.
Governor, I want to jump in here now as well. We have a person who wrote in and wanted to know, House Bill 6439 is looking to increase the funding for nonprofits by about $461 million over 5 years. And the questioner is saying there's a much needed increase to help make nonprofits whole after years of underfunded, compounded by the pandemic. Just wondering what your response would be to that.
I haven't spent a lot of time on that bill. I don't know where the number comes from. Sounds like a big number to me. It does. But I can tell you that in this last year, our not-for-profits were incredible. And they stood up right in the height of the pandemic when a lot of the rest of us were telecommuting. They were taking care of people in need. And for that, we were able to compensate them to some degree in terms of increased caseload. They got extra payments for that. With the federal money we've got this year and next year and the year thereafter, I can give them a lot of assurance that we'll be able to make up for lost time and make sure that they get the payments they deserve. I prefer to use, rather than raise taxes and fool around with the general fund, which runs very lean, by the way. I think we've got about $4 billion from the federal government. That's a lot of money, and I think that's where we should really prioritize. And I'll just, as a business guy, I tell this to the Democrats: don't waste this money. Don't let this be 169 earmarks and everybody gets a little piece of the action for their hometown. I understand politics. I'm learning, but we're going to look like jerks if at the end of 2 years, we didn't do something that was transformative in our state and in our country with this money. And that's everything from transportation to expanded childcare to helping our kids get back in the game. And that includes our not-for-profits and making sure they move into our 21st century and we compensate them for doing great work. And one other thing, I got a lot of guys retiring in state government, and everybody, says I'm cheering that fact. I'm not cheering that fact. I'm not asking everybody to retire, but they're all retiring. That's thousands of people. And that gives us an opportunity to figure out what's the best way to deliver services. And maybe the not-for-profits want to knock on the door. They'll have some pretty good ideas.
Mm-hmm. Let me follow up a couple of things on that. One gets into the workforce. We had a question from one of our members that talked about, years ago, one of the ways young people got into the workforce were those really low-paying jobs, your first jobs, often like in a grocery store or working as a laborer outside. With some of the changes to the minimum wage, are there planned exemptions, or do you foresee a way to get exemptions for some of the underage kids? I'm not talking about 10, I'm talking 15 and a half year olds, 16-year-olds who are looking to get into the workforce, but the employers will tend not to hire if they have to pay them $15 an hour plus.
Well, there's certainly a discount for younger people in their first job. I think it's for 6 months, but I'd have to check that, Jim. Obviously, we have some flexibility in and around tip wages and the such. But more broadly, I'll come back. I wanted to raise the minimum wage on a thoughtful basis over a period of time, so there are no shocks to the system. I think rather than have everybody get underpaid or not even earn enough to take care of their family and the state has to step in, I preferred having a minimum wage that was enough to help a family get by. And so I'd like to think that we've got shared work and other programs that we're doing with the feds. So if you said, I can't afford to hire somebody full-time, but I can afford to hire them part-time, we'll pay the other half of that salary. So doing everything we can to make it easier for you to bring back the employees we need.
So you talked about trying to make a mark with the money we're going to get from the feds. And I agree with you. And I think that we just don't want to do 169 give outs to our group here. But maybe this is an opportunity to look at how we can affect climate change and climate industries moving forward. Is there any thought about how we can maybe use some of those monies like the president is talking about to get into more climate friendly industries or climate friendly transportation systems? I noticed like at our rest stops now, we have Tesla charging stations, it's a few of them, but to look in that direction.
Yeah, we have a bill. It's called the Transportation Climate Initiative. It's a 5-cent carbon fee at the wholesale level. That money goes back. That goes to charging station. That goes to free bus service. That goes to subsidizing public transportation, get people out of cars, using public transportation, decongesting our roads a bit, which would be enormous. I was just up in New London yesterday. We've got the biggest commitment for wind power. And thankfully, we're not behind the curve. We're ahead of the curve for a change in this state. And we got the state pier. It's approved. It's going to build out. I know it's not relevant to all this crowd, but it's really going to be important. So we've got stable electric prices, carbon-free, coming from Millstone. And over time, you're going to see more wind and solar, backfilling there. And Connecticut's going to be ahead of the curve. Look, we're going to be a carbon-free electric grid within 10 years or so. And soon thereafter, I think you're going to see the transportation system more and more carbon-free, since that's the biggest source of pollutants. And I'll tell you, you want to know who got hit hard by COVID, who died in COVID? It was asthma, obesity. A lot of that's in and around asthma, certainly related to people who live near major highways and polluting centers. So we're going to take it very seriously and keep moving.
Let me follow up on that a little bit. And this is more on the solid waste issue. We have a situation where a lot of our trash to energy plants are retiring. We decided not to proceed with that. It doesn't really seem like the state has put in place a plan to deal with our municipal solid waste, especially now that those plants are phased out. Where do you see that going in the next, if not this session, after that?
Yeah, I mean, a group called Mira, they've got the big trash energy plant in Hartford. It pollutes, it creates particulates, it's really expensive. They needed a $300 million upgrade to keep it going. And I got to be frank, I was the one that said slow down. I mean, that would just be an enormous increase in cost to folks in waste. And we're looking at, better alternatives. In and around certainly recycling. I can take 2/3 of the flow, the load out of Mira and take care of that at an awful lot less cost. Near term, we may have to use other trash to energy plants. Near term, we may have to take some of this stuff out of state. But I think we're going to find a way that we're doing a much better job of not burning it, not taking it out of state, but recycling it or decongesting it. And I think that's going to be our future. But if you have any experts on this call, we need your help on that. We've got a pretty good board there at Mira, but, a lot of mayors and stuff. I need some folks with expertise that can help us with this.
Isn't part of the problem we've been facing recently is that the recyclable end, there used to be a market where China and other countries were taking a lot of our plastic, a lot of our cardboard. I know just from my own household, while you try to reduce the amount of plastic you're consuming, the cardboard intake with the Amazon deliveries is astronomical. I think I make my own trips to the dump with the cardboard because I can't wait for my weekly pickup. Isn't part of the problem is where's the market for that? And is there a way
absolutely.
that we
You're so right, Jim.
encourage people to have a market here?
They used to pay us to take these quote recyclable items, and now we have to pay them. So we got to do a better job of creating a market, like you said, for this stuff, so it gets back to business. I think there's an incredible entrepreneurial opportunity for people doing this. We're certainly doing it with the anaerobic and things that are biodigestible. So, but we need help when it comes to cardboard, when it comes to plastic. We can do a much better job.
The call to our members. Garrett, I think you had some questions I just saw.
Yeah, Governor, just jump in with a few other questions. I can't lavish enough praise on you and your staff for everything with the restrictions on COVID. And a lot of times when politicians come on, we do praise them, but that's really true. Obviously, a lot of our businesses were hurt at times by restrictions. I know there's still restrictions in place, so there's people who are frustrated, but just when we look at neighboring states, and I know a lot of the flack that you received in editorials, and sometimes I'll look at your Twitter feed. You were under a lot of fire. So just going forward, though, how do you see? We still have some restrictions. Eventually, I know you'd like to get rid of those. What do you see as the prognosis for those, and also for schools? In New Haven, we had an issue where the schools were not open for a significant period of time, remote only. That thankfully has changed. But we've seen a lot of good things with schools across the state.
I thought that was a terrible mistake, Garrett. We had more schools were open for in-person learning, then open for full-time learning in Connecticut than just about any state in the region, and most any state in the country. And New Haven at that point had a pretty low infection rate, and I thought missed an opportunity to give those kids a little better chance to get back in the classroom. But that's then, now's now. I'll tell you what I didn't want to do, which is what a lot of my neighboring states were doing all during the fall. Remember, we're flaring up again, and they said, let's have a 3-week pause. Let's shut down for 2 weeks. Then we'll start and stop. I thought that was the wrong way to go. I wanted to cautiously reopen on a predictable way. We gave everybody 2 or 3 weeks notice, and we really haven't had to turn back. Going back close to a year, May 20th, we had to close down about this time a year ago, and we started opening up on May 20th, and we've been consistent there. I think that was really helpful for, businesses large and small. Everybody, you want certainty, right? You want to be able to plan, and COVID didn't make it all that easy to plan, to be blunt. We didn't know what was going to happen 1 week to the next, but we tried to be consistent, tried to explain what we were doing, why we're doing it. I think you're going to see most everything open. I think you're going to see most everything open in about 6 weeks. I do incent the young people. I know a lot of guys on my Twitter feed, let's go. I want to let it rip at the bars. Come on, what's the matter with me? Get vaccinated. when you get vaccinated at the same rate your parents got vaccinated, then I'll feel like it's something we can do and we can do safely.
Gavin, I want to
You
just
mentioned
echo
on
what
the budget.
what Garrett said. Oh,
Okay.
sorry, I just want to echo real quick what he said about how you handled the COVID. My wife and I really felt that the restrictions were really well dealt with. There was some issues for a lot of businesses, but everything that you could do, you were. And the vaccine rollout has been really well done, I thought, overall.
And Governor, you mentioned on the budget and how you're resisting tax increases. I know there's still a lot of conversations that are going to occur with the legislature, especially on the stimulus funding. But we have seen neighboring states add taxes, especially in higher brackets and on business as well. So can you just reiterate to us your position for the budget going forward as we start to enter that negotiation process?
Why do you want to raise taxes? I've got the revenues in place to make the investments we need, the support our not-for-profits to make sure our safety net is what it should be coming out of this pandemic. We're going to have an extra $1 billion invested in education over the next 2 years to make sure those kids come back. Don't raise taxes for the sake of raising taxes. I think that's a wrong strategy. This money is we're getting is over 2 years and over 3 years. Garrett, I was a little worried, in the feds, I thought, hey, you're going to get a lot of money. You got to spend it all by December 31st. Oh, thanks. But that's not what they did. And for that, I'm very thankful. It gives us a chance to try out some new programs. And it gives small business, schools, and our not-for-profits a chance to help us dig out from the pandemic.
And we were just talking about some of the labor bills that are out there. I know it's a while until they actually reach your desk. And so there's a lot of different ideas out there. One is a presumption on the employer if someone gets COVID, presumption that they got it at the workplace, set scheduling that cannot change, and if the employer changes it, they pay a penalty. What are your thoughts on some of these labor bills that are coming up?
Well, the presumption you got it at the workplace. The first decision we're going to make is do employees get vaccinated? And who makes that determination? Obviously, a lot of places are requiring vaccinations. I'm not going to be doing this. This is not going to be a government thing, but I think private sector will make up their own minds. That will help answer any presumption. Or if you don't get vaccinated, you have to wear the mask. I mean, people are going to make up their minds, on that. What was the other question, Garrett?
There's another bill around predictive scheduling and making sure, employers have to set the scheduling a couple of weeks in advance. If something changes, then they owe some pay to their employees.
Yeah, I don't know as much about that bill, so let me look into it. But I can tell you one thing. I used to build telecommunication systems. I built them for college campuses. If I didn't have that on before school year began in September, we were destroyed, and the contract paid a price for that. So I paid my guys a fortune and they got the job done. So we were not limited by the schedule.
Okay.
And Jim, I'll hand it back to you. And Governor, we do appreciate it because our theme this year is bring back business, bring back jobs, and how can we get this Connecticut economy going forward and not weigh it down with some other things that are out there.
Great. Governor, we really appreciate your time with us today. We know you have limited. If you have more time, if there's some other subject that we can help you with, you talked about workforce, talked about education, trying to get some of the community colleges to help with that. Is something specific that businesses can be helping you with in terms of the workforce? Lining up the jobs is probably the best thing.
Yeah, you're going to hear from our workforce council. I think you all know David Lamont. What you don't want is the academics creating programs they think you're going to like. We've tried that for 50 years. I want, when it comes to workforce, I want to be putting together programs that you help us develop. You get some people there to help us teach it. I'll pay for it. We've got the federal resources to do it. And Beth Bai has said anybody goes to one of these workforce certificate programs, we'll pay for the daycare, childcare for them throughout that as well. So I just think this is a pretty good time to be in Connecticut. I think we are going to get this COVID behind us if we stay disciplined a little bit longer. Hear me, young people. I think our businesses are coming back. I think they're going to come back strong. My job is to make sure that you have the workforce you need when it comes to the fiscal issues. At least you have predictability. You know what the state's going to look like in a year, 2 years, 3 years. And we start making the investments in transportation that allow us to grow in the future. And I'd like to be in New Haven. I mean, between biopharma and a lot of that's where the future is. And I think you're snap dab in the middle of that future.
Well,
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
You can always visit us. And maybe that's one way to try to keep the folks who have all moved in. They come and have our pizza here in New Haven. Right. Great. Thank you, Governor. Really appreciate your time.
Nice to see you, Jim. Bye, Garrett.
Good to see you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Jim, thank you for moderating that. And I just want to thank everyone who joined us for our Government Affairs Committee. We do meet the second Thursday of the month. So if you came here, enjoyed what you heard, we don't always have the governor, but we do have lively discussion about the topics of the day and use the chamber as a platform to advocate on issues that impact your business.
Appreciate it. Thank you all for coming. If we make it easy for the governor to show up, maybe he'll come again in a couple months, maybe when we're at the point where some of the bills have worked their way into his office and see what's going to happen then. So appreciate you all showing up, and we'll probably have another Zoom in another month. So again, thank you.
Thanks, sir.